is the approval of the summary minutes from November 6, 2012. Gentlemen, are there any comments or motion to approve?
We did want to point out to the Commission that we have taken note that on pages 2 through 5 at the upper header, it still says October 16th on them, but this is in fact your November 6th meeting minutes, and we've got that corrected.
All right. Thank you. Any other additions or corrections?
I'd make a motion to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The minutes are approved. Moving on to the public hearing items, our first item, application Z12-7, filed by Kansas Wesleyan University requesting an amendment to Section 42518, Article 10, Division 2 of the sign regulations, applicable to the university zoning district. Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll give you a little bit of background that we didn't give to you in writing at your first discussion, but back in the year 2000, the athletic department of Kansas Wesleyan University made arrangements with some local businesses to place advertising signs on the back of the scoreboard at Glenn Martin's Stadium. There appears to be some miscommunication and mixed signals, and the signs were in fact put up, followed by a notice sent by the city staff to Kansas Wesleyan that they had not obtained a sign permit to install the signs, and that there was no legal way for the city to issue a permit. Eventually there was a compliance agreement or meeting of the minds between the city manager and the president of Kansas Wesleyan University, and that allowed the signs to remain during the life of the leases that were signed, and then required that they be removed once the leases expired. So those signs were removed, and the back of the scoreboard, as you observe if you drive by, is now blank and painted white. We had some contact with Kansas Wesleyan University in the summer about wanting to revive the idea of placing advertising signs back on the back of the scoreboard, and the staff attempted to create a roadmap by which that could be achieved, where they could obtain and apply for a permit of the location and size that they wanted. And again, the distinction here is that the city of Salina only has a few zoning districts where advertising signs, or in some nomenclature billboards, which advertise businesses that aren't present on the premises, are allowed. So there was a text amendment initiated, and the policy question that you discussed back in August was whether off-premise advertising signs advertising businesses not located on the premises should be allowed in the university zoning district, and on what basis. We also shared with you information as to the specific dimensions and sizes of the sign that was proposed. And if you look at page 2 of your staff report, that is what created the difficulty or dilemma for staff. And if we had not been furnished that information by Kansas Wesleyan, we could have been put in a situation where we could have done some form of a zoning text amendment and then still not allowed the size and scope of sign that they were proposing. So as you were informed back in August, the sign size is 576 square feet, the height is 26 feet, and the setback from cloud is 40 feet. You were posed with several questions back in August, and you indicated that you thought, yes, advertising signs should be allowed in the university district, but only through an approved conditional use permit. You thought that they should be allowed to be larger than the 160 square foot limitation, but only through an approved conditional use permit. And you deferred the matter of talking about electronic changeable copy signs, because that wasn't high on Kansas Wesleyan's list of priorities. So you made a motion And that motion was to recommend that the University District sign regulations be allowed, that they be modified to allow advertising signs as a conditional use and allowed to exceed 160 square feet if approved under a conditional use permit. At that same meeting, following notice to neighbors, there was a consideration of a conditional use permit application, which was a companion item, and you recommended approving a conditional use permit for the proposed sign contingent upon the City Commission's approval of the zoning ordinance changes. And so that, at this point, has not occurred. You left it to staff to draft the details of that, but the city attorney has indicated that the Planning Commission needs to review and make a recommendation on the proposed amendment in its final form. And staff went back and looked at that and looked at some of the amendments we had related to tattoo parlors and things of that nature, and the appropriate response would be to have you direct what you'd like to see in the way of the ordinance, continue the public hearing, and then have us bring that back. But in the case here, we have, out of caution, we have re-advertised and republished the notice and been very specific, and we now have very specific text language for you to look at. So John, if you could go directly to the proposed ordinance. The ordinance has been tailored pretty specifically to address the situation that we're facing. So the functional types are permitted in the University District remain unchanged. The functional types that are conditional under a conditional use permit include advertising signs facing outward on the rear side of a scoreboard structure. And then as far functional type indicates what purpose does the sign serve in terms of notifying the public. Structural type is what is the physical structure of the sign itself. So scoreboard-mounted signs with a gross surface area and sign height in excess of the maximum size and height specified in subsections 6 and 7, or with a setback that is less than the minimum setback in 8. Those are items that can be approved through a conditional use permit. So you can see that the language that's there doesn't open up the University District to billboards everywhere. It is, this amendment is very specific. It's advertising signs on the back of a scoreboard, and the only type of sign that can be approved with a surface area and sign height and setback that varies from the standards in the code is on the back of a scoreboard. So your role today is to look at the draft, the specific draft that we have brought back to you, and see if you believe that that reflects what you want to see happen in terms of changes to the ordinance. If you would like to see something that's broader than that, you need to advise us. But this, the way that this is structured, it would basically allow what Kansas Wesleyan is proposing to do, but not open the door to a whole lot of other advertising signs in university districts. Would point to you two things. One, if you look at page 4, we've identified alternatives for your consideration. One would be to recommend approval of the text amendment as drafted, which would add billboards and advertising signs to the list allowed in the university district. And we have already, under this alternative, had notice to surrounding property owners and a public hearing, which was attended or had written comment from neighboring property owners. But we would not anticipate this coming back up very often, because they're not. The only conceivable one I could think of is if St. John's Military School, which is in the university district. If they had a scoreboard, they might be able to have rear-mounted signage on that. But this only applies to university district properties, and it's very specific to scoreboard advertising. Your other options would be to recommend approval with some modifications to the text, or you could refer this back to us for additional study or options, or you could say you don't like the idea at all and you would like to keep the status quo. I'd also point out to you attachment 4 there, which is to the report, and it just gives you a format for making motions on text amendments, and you need to consider how this will, if you think this is in the best interest of the public and also our university district zoned areas. But with that, I'd be open to any questions you have about the specific amendment.
Questions of staff?
Dean, refresh my memory, if you would. On a conditional use permit, if they were to be approved for a conditional use permit for a sign for the back of the scoreboard, and they wanted to change the copy, would they have to come back to you to amend that, or could that be?
No. What the conditional use permit does is it sets out the parameters of 576 square feet of the existing height and the existing setback. So if in midstream they had a change in businesses or whatever and wanted to change one out, they don't need a permit for that or any change. The one stipulation that the Planning Commission did recommend was that it be approved for a period of 5 years, subject to Planning Commission review and renewal at that time.
See, and that's what I'm a little bit lost in this process, because I thought we addressed all this stuff, so I thought I was having deja vu when I read this again. It seemed like we talked about all these things, but in the 5 years, even with what we're doing here, that 5 years is still in place.
Yes. And what you did was contingent on the City Commission moving ahead and approving this text amendment.
You have to have a text, there's no way to approve it without a City Commission text amendment change.
That is correct.
And no other way.
No other way.
Okay.
And so what we have for you today is the specific city attorney reviewed language that will allow us to issue that permit.
And I want to be clear, because I was supportive of it when we talked about it previously, and I'm still supportive of it only because it's a good option for what that scoreboard looks like right now. If they do significant enhancements to their stadium, I wouldn't see that to be necessarily an option I would want to consider in the future. If that scoreboard could be moved to the other end, so to speak, or something, it might be more appropriately placed. It's really a little too close to the road as it is, but they have no option right now. So if they do enhance their stadium at some time or get a new scoreboard, is this off the table then?
If once it has been removed and they want to put it at a different location, that's a new conditional use permit.
Thank you.
So it's allowed in this location, in this form, for 5 years, subject to review. If they remove it in 3 years and reconfigure the stadium and they want to do it at the north end, there'll be a new conditional use permit.
Thank you.
Is it stated where that it has to be an active working scoreboard? I mean, if they wanted to abandon that scoreboard and build around it, but leave that facing on the street there, is there anything that says, I mean, it would still be a scoreboard, is there anything in the text amendment that?
It's still a scoreboard that is the structure that's holding it up.
So they could build a whole coliseum around that and still leave that there, behind there, and it would stay there for, well, it would be the only period of 5 years though, correct?
Right. 5 years, this would get revisited regardless.
I didn't see a time frame on here though in the text amendment. That the
Well,
next city commission.
it's not in the text amendment on page 4, where we summarized that you endorse this contingent upon the City Commission approval of the zoning ordinance changes. You stated that approval was for a period of 5 years, subject to Planning Commission review and renewal at that time.
Trying to form my question. Let's say that Kansas Wesleyan goes through a major renovation and changes the way their stadium is laid out. And let's say as a result of that, they decide to solicit from businesses some space on the backside of their stadium wall or something like that. Then we're going to have to go back in and make a new if we chose to, we'd have to go back in and make a new text amendment to allow any other kind of sign, anyplace else in that property besides
If
this
it is
scoreboard.
an advertising sign.
Well,
That is the gist of it.
Okay.
The ordinance already allows them to have identification signs that identifies the name of the stadium or identifies entrances or things like that. But when you're talking about advertising, you're talking about promoting businesses or products that are not associated with the stadium.
I was just looking at, when we do a text amendment for an ordinance, it would be nice to not have to go back and continue to change that ordinance. It'd be better to look at it through the conditional use, and this is so narrow, it just says scoreboard.
Yes, it is designed to be narrow because just so we have just all kinds of commercial districts in Salina where you can't put up advertising signs, and so the university district is not one that one would normally associate with billboards or advertising signs.
But so I'm clear, should Kansas Wesleyan choose to put a 160-foot square sign there with electronic changeable copy, that would be permitted under the current ordinance, right?
That is correct.
So they have options for a sign in the future if they develop that into something more attractive.
That if they want to identify the stadium with a 160 square foot identification sign, they're allowed to do that.
Okay.
This is only before you because it is an advertising sign.
And the other thing I want to be clear on, the outward facing, that is very specific. Outward facing from their property or
Outward facing from the scoreboard to the outside world as opposed to inward facing.
I'm just looking at that, there are lots of places that do a lot of advertising around stadiums.
Right.
Much of it right now is within the stadium confines, so that the people on the other side, if you will, get to the advantage of those signs.
Including
That would not,
the city of Salina at East Crawford Recreation Area, Dean Evans Stadium. If you have signs that are inside the stadium and are oriented to the spectators there, those are not regulated signs.
all right, thanks.
This is facing the outside world.
The application talks about the illuminated electronic changeable signs. Did we have that already approved in another section that's...
No, what you said to do and what they were not, this was their immediate concern, and so your direction on that was to save that discussion for another day, because it's not something they're interested in right now.
Okay, well, since we talked about it on the other school districts, I thought we ought to have the same kind of illuminated sign permission in the university district, but we wouldn't have to do it immediately. But it is in their application.
Another text amendment.
Right, that would be another text amendment for another time. Their immediate concern is this sign.
Okay.
Other questions of staff? Would the applicant like to address the commission?
Just that this is deja vu with the words now on paper instead of verbally, and I appreciate the consideration. Commissioner Kennedy addressed the visual appeal of the backside of our sign, and we would welcome contributions from you and others to make the stadium project happen quicker. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any comment on this item from the public? There being none, I'll bring it back to commission for further discussion. Gentlemen, is there more discussion on this text amendment, or is there a motion to approve?
Before the motion, I just have one, I just need, at some point, it doesn't need to be now, I guess I need a little refresher course on where we're at with electronic changeable copy signs. I need to know where we are with that, because I asked the question about, is it permissible? And I thought you said yes, and then I think we went through all that about a year ago and had that kind of wrapped up. So I'm not clear on where we're at with that.
What we did was we first looked at, based on a proposal from Cottonwood Elementary School, we looked at the appropriateness of allowing electronic changeable copy signs in residential districts for uses like nursing homes, churches, schools, things of that nature.
Bicentennial Center.
Well, the Bicentennial Center is in a commercial zone. So you recommended and the City Commission approved a text amendment that allowed electronic changeable copy signs not exceeding 32 square feet at elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, churches, nursing homes. Then, when we got into the discussion of the public use district, we wanted to make sure that if we had schools or public facilities in a public use district, that we carry over those same opportunities for electronic changeable copy signs. So you adopted a set of criteria for electronic changeable copy signs in a public use district. That we had not gotten to the university district yet.
Oh, okay.
And so when we were having discussions with Kansas Wesleyan, it was staff's suggestion to say, well, let's at least bring that up to see if the City Planning Commission is how they view that, to have the university district have the same opportunities. And since we were focused on the text amendment for the specific scoreboard sign, we focused on that, and the Planning Commission said you wanted to talk about the electronic changeable copy signs at a later date, and Kansas Wesleyan said they had no immediate interest in that at this time, and so that would just be an item for another day as it relates to the university district.
Thank you.
And my feeling about that was that that's a pretty large sign, so we didn't really want to go to talk about the electronic. That's suited that particular
No,
situation.
yeah, but I want to make sure, I thought we had addressed this already.
Yes.
for the public.
We have addressed it in the residential districts and public use district,
Okay.
and
Not, but not yet.
at some point in the university district when there's somebody interested.
Okay.
Any other remarks or comments? Is there a motion on this item?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we approve application, recommend to the City Commission that the zoning text amendment Z12-7 be approved for the following reasons. Number one, that the proposed amendment is consistent with the intent and purpose of the zoning ordinance. And number two, that the proposed amendment will not adversely affect the orderly development of the city of Salina. And number three, that the proposed amendment will not be detrimental or endanger the public health, safety, or general welfare of the city of Salina.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second?
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That item carries unanimously. We'll move on to item number 3, application CU 12-7, filed by Mr. Sean Martin, requesting a conditional use permit for a tattoo parlor. Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an application that was filed for a location on South 9th Street, that's Zone C3. By way of background, after we had discussed tattoo parlors in the C4 district and allowing tattoo parlors as conditional uses in the Lee district, you agreed to initiate a text amendment to establish in which zoning districts and under what circumstances tattoo parlors and body piercing studios should be allowed in the remainder of the community. So as a result of that, you conducted an initial public hearing where we looked at several questions. You gave guidance to staff. Based on that direction, we prepared a draft text amendment for you that was brought back for your consideration on January 17, 2012. And after further review, staff recommended that tattoo parlors not be allowed in C7 or I1 districts, and they should be allowed as permitted uses in I2 and I3, but be conditional in all the other commercial districts. So that was your recommendation, which you made a favorable recommendation on the 17th of January. The City Commission concurred with your recommendation and approved an ordinance which added tattoo parlors to the list of conditional uses allowed in the C3 district. So where we're at this afternoon is on South Ninth Street, where in 1963 there was a Klepper Oil gas station opened, and it operated continuously till the mid-90s. And the convenience store type operations have periodically opened and closed since that time. And the last active business there was a Conoco station. This property is now owned by Arrow LLC, but it's currently vacant, and they've got a prospective tenant who's Point Blank Tattoo, which is owned and operated by Sean Martin, and his interest in leasing this former gas station. And your decision today is whether you find this to be a suitable location for a tattoo parlor. I want to compliment the applicant for the information that you have available in your packet in terms of the site plan and floor plan drawings indicating how the space would be used and the business operated. The applicant states that all business-related activities will be confined to the interior of the building, and that active tenancy will help maintain the physical condition and appearance of the property. So your role in this case is to evaluate the applicant's proposed use of the building and property and determine whether a tattoo parlor and body piercing studio would be compatible with surrounding uses. And the purpose, of course, of the hearing is to allow public input about and establish appropriate conditions for the use. And some of the factors you are to consider is whether the proposed use will comply with applicable zoning ordinance requirements. And the applicant states that the building on the lot complies with C3 regulations. We would agree that the existing structures do comply with C3 requirements. However, the one front canopy is closer to 9th Street than what would normally be allowed, and that was approved through a setback variance. The other thing you'll notice that the site is long on paving and short on green space, but that's a product of the time at which it developed. It certainly predates our landscaping regulations. Another factor to continue to look at is whether the conditional use will contribute to the welfare and convenience of the public. And the applicant indicates that this will allow an experienced shop manager to own and operate his own business in a commercial location. The applicant's been a state licensed tattoo artist for 11 years and wants to have his own parlor to provide the public with safe, clean tattooing and piercing services. He indicates that if you approve this, it'll put a vacant building into productive use and allow an established artist to operate from a facility that's centrally located. So we have a layout that you have that is in your packet, and John can kind of scroll through the sides there, but they indicate that they have space for cleaning and a sterilization room and for disposal. In terms of the what you should be looking at in this regard is whether you think filling this space with a tattoo parlor would contribute to the welfare and convenience of the public by adding tattoo parlors to the business mix on this corridor. In terms of impact or injury to surrounding property, all activities do have to take place indoors. The applicant has indicated how tattooing procedures will be handled. One factor that we may want to discuss with the applicant is just what the plans are for identification sign or signage. One of the things that we suggested as a possible condition was not allowing signage on the existing gas pump canopies. But the impact, the noticeability, it's a fairly small building, but the noticeability may be a factor of wall and window signage. There should be no impact on public utilities and services. In terms of adequate access drives and parking, I think the Planning Commission is well aware of the stacking problems on South 9th Street between Cloud and Claflin. and so having alternate access onto Woodland is a good thing. And we've calculated they need 4 to 5 parking spaces, and so we think there's adequate paved area. It just is a matter of having it properly arranged and marked. So you've got 4 options. You could approve the conditional use permit application if you find that the requirements in the conditional use permit standards have been met. You could approve the application subject to certain conditions or revisions. If you find those findings have been met, you could postpone consideration. If you think additional information is needed to reach a decision, you could deny the application if you don't think the findings of fact can be made. So if, based on the information provided by the applicant, you find that a tattoo parlor tenant space in this location would not have a negative impact on the surrounding area, we have outlined 11 possible conditions there, and one deals with wall signing and not covering it up more than 33% of the front window with window signs, and not allowing signage on the canopies, requiring a minimum of 4 parking stalls. And then the other conditions are pretty closely tied to the state laws and regulations applicable to tattooing and body piercing. But we have 11 outlined there, and wanted to call your attention, item 10, that the conditional use permit could be modified or revoked should it be determined that the tattoo parlor or body piercing studio, or the conditions under which it was permitted, that they have been violated, or if this is becoming perceived as creating a nuisance for other businesses in the area. So we don't have it for you to put up on the screen, but in your packet is a summary of state laws and regulations applicable to tattooing and body piercing. It is regulated by the Kansas State Board of Cosmetology. There are licenses that are posted. There are inspections of the premises for health and safety. You have to demonstrate a proficiency, a skill in order to obtain a license. So it is a regulated occupation. I think you've had a chance to look at all the exhibits and some photographs there. John, if you could go to the findings of fact. You have attached to the back of the your handouts there, as far as the layout of the tattoo parlor, public hearing meeting procedures for quasi-judicial land use matters. This is a quasi-judicial land use matter, and it indicates that we will provide a summary of our findings at the end of the staff report for you to accept and agree with or disagree with, and you may consider other information. And there are certain factors that we've gone through that you're to consider in making a decision whether to approve or deny a conditional use permit. So John, if you could go to the findings of fact. These are the staff findings that the tattoo parlor and body piercing studio is allowed in this location, subject to approval of a conditional use permit. That C3 district is designed to provide a district for a broad range of shops and stores, and it requires business activity to be conducted inside a building. The applicant's plan complies with that, as does the location of the building. The operators will be required to comply with all applicable state health and safety requirements. The proposed tattoo parlor would put a former vacant gas station into active use, and in the opinion of the applicant, improve the physical condition and appearance of the property, which is presently vacant. It will not cause injury to the value of other property, because the conditions of approval, the 11 that we've identified there, are intended to ensure that it does remain compatible with its surroundings. We're only talking about a 30 by 38-foot building, and based on the size and proportion to the remainder of the lot and other surrounding businesses, it should not generate a large amount of business activity or traffic. There's adequate paved area available to accommodate employee and customer parking. There shouldn't be any impact on utilities or drainage. And the property has multiple driveways, including one on Woodland, and so it should have a limited impact on the existing traffic congestion on 9th Street. So those are our findings related to this application, and we'd be open to any questions that you have.
Questions for staff? If there are none, I would offer the podium to the applicant. Would you like to address the commission about your application?
I just wanted to say that I just hope that sorry, you guys take this in good consideration and everything. I've been doing this for 11 years, and I enjoy my job. I love my job. I don't see myself being anywhere else, and I hope to bring this to other people to enjoy as well. And I really hope you guys consider taking this.
Thank you very much. John, I neglected to ask you to state your address for the secretary needs that, so your name and address for the record there is...
My name's Sean Martin, and the address right at the moment is 676 South Ohio.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Martin from the commission? Thank you, sir. Yep. Okay. Is there anyone I'll open the public session. Is there anyone that would like to address this issue? This will be your only opportunity to comment in the public session. There being none, I'll close the public session and bring it back to the commission.
Mr. Chairman, I do have one question that I think this is an incidental matter, but I'm just sort of curious. I've heard talk, both in general city planning as well as the Planning Commission, that there might at some point be the option of widening 9th Street in that corridor. Are there any plans to do that, and would they in any way impact any of the businesses in this particular block?
The item is being studied. There's a contract let to look at that intersection. And John, if you could go back maybe to the survey-type site plan, or I guess we could look at this. The primary challenge with 9th Street is that it has limited right-of-way. And on this side, there's 30 feet from the center of the street to the west right-of-way line. And so it's in order to accommodate any widening of that intersection, you're probably going to need to acquire some additional right-of-way on both sides, or particularly on the west side. So yes, there is widening of the intersection being discussed, and the right-of-way in place is not adequate to support widening. So, but there's going to be some public meetings on that, and it's currently under study.
Okay.
Gentlemen, I bring your attention to attachment number 2. This is a quasi-judicial land matter, and we've been asked to follow some additional procedures as we consider this type of item. Staff is providing us with a summary of its findings at the end of the staff report, which we may accept or not agree with, and we can consider any other information supplied to us by the public and on the topic. And at the close of the public hearing, the chairman will ask the commissioners whether they disagree with the findings and the recommendations put forward by staff. We have the option of going into a closed session with the city attorney at the time to deliberate the matter and develop any alternative findings and conclusions. So following that procedure, I'll ask the commission if you agree with the findings that have been stated by the staff? Any comments about that? All agree with the list of 7 were there? Or?
Yes, 7 findings related to the conditional
Okay.
use permit.
Is there further comment or questions on this item? I'll be ready to hear a motion.
I'd like to hear if Mr. Brown or Mr. Walker have any thoughts they'd like to weigh in on this.
I just make a comment on my behalf, or does go to a motion on theirs. Many months ago, I guess, when I became on there, they asked about certain areas of town that I thought needed to be looked at and made corridors, and this has been one of my particular ones. I was excited when Kansas Wesleyan, and I can see that they're under construction now, putting up their maintenance shop building. It's starting to look really, really nice. Again, I patronize the applicant that's there. I'm just not quite sure that I'm in favor of that as the best location at this time to be I mean, I'm at a crossroads here because I know about putting a vacant building to use. I wouldn't want to sit on a vacant building. But we've had some issues, this commission has, with tattoo parlors with the one, I mean, so it's a little sticky for me to vote on that, and then to be in this particular area. I mean, there's nothing, to me, it's like taking an abandoned gas station, putting in a tattoo parlor, and, you know, it's like, I may regret this comment later, but next, are we going to put a liquor store next to it? You know what I mean? It's like it's got that somewhat of a stigma still, in my opinion. And I'm not quite sure that we're moving in the right direction. I thought we were moving in the right direction with Kansas Wesleyan wanting to do that and build in that location. Now, with that being said, will you be there in 3 years, or will you be there in 4 years, or will you be there in 5 years when I think this corner will develop? That's a great question for, you know, so I'm looking at it going, okay, can I approve this, thinking they may be there for 2 or 3 years and outgrow it, but it gets the current owner some income coming in who bought a building and can't get it leased now. So I would look to any of my fellow commissioners to see what your opinions are on that corridor and what you're thinking of adding, if that adds value to that corridor or if it doesn't.
I can give you a little bit of perspective on staff's findings and our recommendation in terms of the findings there, that if this was new construction or a redevelopment proposal or a proposed new building for that purpose, I think we would concur with that view. And if this was not an existing small building, I don't think we'd have taken the findings of fact that we did, but I guess staff's view is that if we get active redevelopment in this corridor, it's likely to occur after any street improvements get made, one, and it's probably going to involve demolition and redevelopment. And so I guess from our perspective, it's a short-term use of an existing structure as opposed to a new development or redevelopment. And so you would just have to balance that between the current vacant status of the structure and having it in active use as a tattoo parlor. That's really the question you're facing today.
You know, one of the things, I sort of tend to take the type of business out of the equation and look at what's happening. And I think any business that's clean, well-lighted, attractive, well-maintained is an enhancement to that area, frankly. And then if you add in what you believe about tattoo parlors or liquor stores or whatever, that, you know, may change one's opinion. But just the fact that I don't think we'd be questioning it if it were any other type of business. If they maintain it properly, that's what's important, I think. And make sure it's clean, attractive.
Is there any way, and maybe I can address the applicant on there as well, if you will, Sean, can I?
The public sessions.
Oh, I can't ask for anything?
We were done with that.
Okay.
We won't go back to the public session.
Yep. Mine would be then just again on with the, how they would get the public and keep them in the building. Again, go down on the Santa Fe one, there's 4 or 5 people out there at any given time. I think we've addressed the one of downtown by leasing the space next door of not having 4 or 5 people out there. So, but again, if the landlord is okay with that and everything's from there, I just think that there's still been some things that happen. I think it's just certain things that happen at this type of establishment that continues to be a pattern, which is while people are waiting, they stand outside and gather, and I guess you can do that on any establishment, but...
I think, like Ken, too, I think that we tend to, the older members of this commission, probably not our younger ex officio members, but we tend to look at those things more than we normally would. If it was a coffee shop and people were gathering out front, we probably wouldn't have that same opinion of it. But it is a tattoo parlor, and our, social upbringing probably taught us that was something that we ought to be looking twice at. So anyway, we're looking at the people outside, and they're assembling legally, and if they're not breaking any laws, I think, like Ken, I think we just have to look at, are we putting a business to use? But, certainly if it did warrant consideration by enough members of this commission, we do have the right to put a time limit, say a 5-year limit on this, and then have the staff administratively revisit that, and if it was okay under your same set of findings, it could be reissued. Is that a possibility?
We don't have that listed as one of the 11 conditions, but you could put a time frame on it, subject to a compliance review at some point in time, or having it come back to you for your review. That was an option that was considered with the Iron Avenue Tattoo Parlor, but it was not included.
I think at some point you've got to trust each entrepreneur to run his business well, and at least this piece of property doesn't have some of the obvious parking and close to the street type of issues that the downtown place had. So I don't, if he's successful, like the other only example we had in front of us, and that fella needed twice the room, he'll just have to move to find another better place if he needs more space to do his operation. So I don't think that there needs to be any time constraints.
Well, I was going to say, this may or may not be relevant, but when in the block to the south of this intersection, you have the health club. People who are concerned about the appearance of their body go there for whatever.
And they probably have more tattoos than...
They may. Yeah, they may. In fact, if I get in good enough shape, I'm going to get a tattoo to show it off. And you also have liquor stores just across the way that I occasionally frequent, so it must be a fairly high-class place. So, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, are we ready for a motion?
I'm ready to have a motion.
I move that application CU 12-7 be approved based on, and do I need to recite all 7 of those, or can I
No,
say based on the 7
based on the same
findings of fact outlined for us by staff?
I would second the
11
motion.
conditions.
And would that include those 11 conditions on page 6?
And the partridge in the pear tree, yes.
I'd second that motion.
Okay.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Let the record show Mr. Welsh is a no.
This one's okay, I think.
Moving on with item number 4, an application numbered Z1223, filed by Quail Meadows Estates Incorporated. Staff?
Mr. Stokes.
Recuse myself because Mr. Nyquist is a client of mine.
Okay, thank you for letting us know that, and let the record say that Mr. Story has stepped down.
What we have for you today is 2 items related to Quail Meadows Estates, which is a development out on Schilling Road. And the first is a public hearing item, the second is an administrative item. And so the first application is a request to rezone property that's part of Block 8 in Quail Meadows Estates, which is a large, nearly 8-acre block that sits on the north side of Schilling Road. And that block is bounded by Kaywood Drive, Eileen Lane and Melanie Lane, with Schilling Road being on the south. And what Mr. Byquist is applying to do is to take a area that is within this block and carve out 7 residential building lots that are more or less twins of the lots that are proposed on the north, or that exist on the north side. And so this area is 560 feet wide. The lots would be 132 feet deep. It covers 1.7 acres of the block. And as we noted, in 2004, it was zoned C1 for offices or apartment use, but has remained vacant and undeveloped since that time. So the request is to go with R1 zoning, which is the same as the zoning classification on the north side of Eileen Lane. And one thing you're to look at is whether the suitability of the property under the existing C1 zoning and the extent to which the C1 zoning inhibits development of the property. And it is the belief of the applicant that the current C1 zoning inhibits development potential of the property, and that it's more suitable and marketable for single-family home construction than for offices or possibly a church or full development as an apartment site. I think we'd agree that the physical attributes of the property, the availability of utilities, and would make it a suitable extension of residential development, and basically would replicate the pattern on the north side of the street. The other thing you're to look at is the character of the neighborhood and whether R1 zoning would be compatible. Obviously, there's 135 lots in Quail Meadows Estates. The majority of those are zoned R1 for single-family use. And so it's across the street from R1 zoning on the north. So staff would agree that it is compatible with the zoning and uses of nearby property. We just note there, and we are working and in communication with Mr. Byquist, that as you take out a strip of this laid out block, you need to plan everything carefully if you're going to do it in phases to make sure that the remainder isn't done in a piecemeal fashion that makes any part of it unusable. In terms of water supply and fire protection, there is an existing water line in Eileen Lane. There's existing sewer in Eileen Lane. This subdivision has a existing storm water system that takes water south to the Schilling Road ditch. There's fire protection available from Station 3 at Belmont and Key, and that's about 5 minutes away coming from Linda Lane. As far as schools, just like the remainder of the subdivision, it would be Coronado, South Middle School, and South High. And in terms of the comprehensive plan, the area to the intersection of Schilling and Ohio is shown as a neighborhood center. This subdivision is shown as suburban residential, which runs on the average of about 4 units per acre, and putting 7 units on 1.73 acres computes to 4 units per acre. Staff's findings are that the location and physical attributes of this property and the availability of an existing paved street and public utilities make it suitable for single-family development without any more public improvements. It is a logical extension of the existing residential development pattern in the Quail Meadows Estates addition, and the R1 zoning would be compatible with the property across the street. All needed public utilities exist to serve the site, and the requested zoning change would be consistent with the suburban residential designation. Our recommendation will be to approve this, but what our recommendation is on both of these items, this is a public hearing item, so we should hear from Mr. Byquist and also any other interested citizens. At the close of the public hearing, we would recommend that the hearing be continued until such time that a final plat is placed on the Planning Commission's agenda. So we'll get into the details of the plat in the next item, but I think at this time, staff's conclusion is that the rezoning request is compatible with its surroundings, but we think that the zoning request should be tied with the submittal of a replat that will allow for the lots to be created. So with that, we'll be open to any questions. And again, our recommendation at the close of the hearing would be to continue the hearing until we have a final plat submitted.
Questions for staff?
I have a couple. Imagine that. One is this compatible with the city master plan? And I think we're always interested in that. And the second question would be, since this is rezoning, it will have to go through that process of posting a sign and all that?
Yes.
Okay.
And there is a sign posted on the property.
Timeframe in here, is there a sign posted now?
Yes.
Okay, so that's been, all those conditions have been met.
Yes, there's a sign on the property.
So I guess that puts me to the first question, is it compatible with the city master plan?
The master plan shows this area over here. These lots are zoned commercial. This lot has disappeared and is merged into this lot. So starting at this point over to Ohio with some of the Stone Lake and the four corners of the intersection is shown as a neighborhood center for mixed commercial, maybe medium-density residential development. From this point over this way, it shows it as suburban residential, which is low-density residential.
Thank you.
Other questions with staff?
Yeah, I'm just curious why the tract cut out there doesn't go completely to the west to connect to Kaywood Drive and have a couple more residential lots in it. And I suppose that's a question for the sponsor or the owner.
I think he'd have a very good explanation for that.
The applicant like to address the commission. And if you would, your name and address for the record.
Stan Byquist, 2601 South Ohio. First of all, thanks for hearing me, and I want to thank the staff for giving a very good synopsis on the area. And I guess I probably better address that question right away. It looks piecemeal, but if you look at that drawing right there, we're looking to rezone, excuse me, 7 lots, R1 residential. Friday, I put in an application for a conditional use permit on the west lot for a senior 16-unit apartment, 4 units.
That whole west side?
4 buildings. That west tract.
Okay.
So it may look piecemeal how we're doing this, but the dominoes had to fall into place.
So that would have to come along with the final plat and be another additional rezoning then.
Actually, I think I probably should let Dean answer that.
Given the fact that these applications are coinciding with each other, it might be a very good idea to do that, because one of the things that we have is that, and what I pointed out to Mr. Byquist is, if the plat is this, and we need the full width, this easement doesn't exist today, but if the plat were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and this were 8, then including this in the plat would allow these easements to be dedicated through the plat as well. And as the timing of these is starting to coincide, that might be the best way to handle it, to get those easements in place.
When you have to change the zoning then, would you have to change the zoning for that then?
What the application is has been filed for this. This is still Zone C1, this is still Zone C1. In the C1 district, you may apply through a conditional use permit to do multifamily housing. So they're not requesting to change the zoning, but they are requesting a conditional use permit to have that particular plan approved. And that will be a public hearing item as well.
And that is not currently a separate lot, so it
No, it is
still
not
have to be
currently a
in
separate
the
lot.
plat change at some point. Okay.
I guess with that, I would try to answer any other questions you have. It's a bit complicated.
Right.
But the approach he's taken will work, of doing this first and
Yes,
that.
the approach he's taken will work. When we met with Mr. Byquist, these two projects were kind of on different timelines. This was a more immediate interest, but what we're needing to do is get some additional revised drawings from Mr. Byquist's surveyor that have all the elements of a plat, because he can't sell or build on these lots till they're platted and recorded and they exist. And this is what I'd call a concept plat, but it doesn't have all the elements of a plat yet, so.
So I thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So our recommendation would be to give any feedback you wish to Mr. Byquist or to your fellow commissioners about if you think this is conceptually a good idea, but our recommendation would be to close the public hearing, continue the public hearing until such time as a drawing that has all the elements of a final plat can be put before you.
Is there anyone else from the public that would like to comment on this item? And if you would, please come forward and let us know your name and address for the record, please.
Elvin Ocasio, 731 Joni Lane. Gentlemen, I live in this neighborhood, 731. I live north of Elaine on Joni. Excuse me, I'm very nervous. First time doing this. I'm kind of new to Salina. It's my city, and I'm in civilian now. I'd like to see this be rezoned for a residential neighborhood, or for residential R1. I believe it'll give it a look to it, uniformity. I guess it's been drilled into my brain, and I kind of would like to see that in this area. Go into my neighborhood, houses to the left and right. I don't have a problem with commercial to the east there. I think it's uniform, you know what I mean? That's all I have.
Okay.
You support the plan as he's proposing it?
Yes, I would like to see it as a single family.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Is there any other comment from the public? If being none, I'll bring it back to the commission. Gentlemen, if you have any more questions of staff, you've heard the staff recommendation. I would ask you first if there's agreement with the findings and recommendations that the staff has put forward. Yes. Do we have a consensus on that?
I think so.
Okay, we've had that in the record. Is there a motion on this item?
I'd make a motion that we follow staff recommendation and approve the application Z12-23 as presented.
I think staff had recommended that we postpone that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought
Our recommendation would be to continue the public hearing until such time as a final plat is brought back for your consideration.
Then that would be my motion.
Okay. Then the motion is revised. Is there a second?
I would second that with the understanding that we will actually have the combined, can we have that, can we put that condition in there that it be combined with
A
the
combined plat with the
anticipated
west lot.
west lot and the conditional use permit for that lot?
Okay.
Then they have one plat for that whole block 8.
Is that doable time-wise, Stan?
So then be a big hang-up with trying to bring in the multifamily, the low-density multifamily, along with this.
This survey is already done, this is established, so all it is a matter of doing is taking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then taking this and turning it into a drawing that has all the elements of a plat. It would not be difficult for the surveyor to do that.
And for the time being, the rest of Block 8 could even be called Lot 9 under the
Well,
PC1 program.
What we're talking about is that this would remain as Block 8. This would
Okay.
become what we would call Quail Meadows Estates Addition Number 2.
Okay.
So you'd have lots 1 through 8, addition number 2. This would continue to be Block 8 of that. And if we come back and do anything with this later, this might become addition number 3.
Okay.
Anyway, to answer your question, I think it's doable. We are dealing with two different entities here. One is myself on the 7 lots. There's a different entity under contract on the multifamily. And that is all contingent on your approval at a later date. So I don't know if that,
Well, the hearing on the west piece will be scheduled for December 18th. And it's very likely that this application and the companion plat may very well all be combined to be considered at the 18th. What you have to think through, Mr. Byquist, is that you will not have transferred title of the property yet to your contract purchaser, so it would still be within your control to plat it that way. And if, for some reason, the Planning Commission would not approve that development here, in that, then we would simply delete that from the replat, and we'd be back to 7.
okay, then I guess it's doable.
Okay.
Abner, why do you want to change his request? I mean, why not let him do it the way he requested?
I just thought it would be
And
more,
if we're doing this, then we're going to need to have the motion maker amend his.
I just thought it would be more efficient, and
Well, it's up to him.
It would be done in
You.
one plat. So that was kind of in the terms of a question, and when I asked, can that be done?
It probably would be more efficient to do as you're asking.
Does that hold you up, though, in selling the 7 lots? though?
Yeah,
It's
the
really gonna
paramount thing
come
right
down to
now is to
timing.
get the 7 lots on the market.
I'm sort of not inclined to start working on what-if scenarios. I mean, the application before us is to approve these 7 lots as presented, and you have a plan for that. You're working on the other plan. I don't want to tie you up with both those be together. I think the plan presented is a fair one, and the staff, if we're not going to do that, I say, rather than us try to work it out at this table, we table the whole thing and let you and Dean work it out and bring it back to us as a combined package. If that's my preference is to approve what the staff recommendation is right now, as in front of us, just my motion was.
That would probably be my wish, too.
Okay, and
my motion.
leave the other tract for later discussion. I'll agree with that for a second. Let's move on.
Our recommendation on this public hearing item is still to continue the public hearing until the final plat of this 7 lots comes back.
And that's fine.
So is Mr. Perney in agreement with that motion?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
I did.
And
Change
we
back to
won't, we
that.
won't do a time certain because it will be continued till the final plat is submitted.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Other matters?
Well, we still have item
Oh, I'm
5
sorry.
here.
Number 5.
And item 5 is a companion item. There's not much to add other than we've got a lot of detail in there about some fees that are attributable to development in Quail Meadows Estates, but it's essentially the same. And if, John, you could go to the R1 development standards, please. Just wanted to show you as it relates to this development, here's what R1 has in the way of rules, 25-foot minimum. It can be reduced on a corner lot on the non-address side, a 7.5-foot side yard, 25-foot rear yard. These are the minimum dimensions. The lots that we're discussing here are 10,296 square feet. On average, they're 78 feet wide and 132 feet deep. And again, we reemphasize that there's no minimum house size requirements, just lot and setback requirements. So what the situation we were faced with here is that what we cannot sit here and say we have a plat drawing that meets all the elements required by the subdivision regulations and Kansas Land Survey standards. So our recommendation is that you provide feedback to the applicant, which you have, and that any action on the replat be postponed until we receive a final plat drawing.
Any remarks to staff comments? Applicant, would you like to address that piece?
Stan Byquist again, 2601 South Ohio. First of all, I want to apologize on my behalf and my surveyor's behalf. Due to a merger of my surveyor, the paperwork needed is not here. So I just hope you'll bear with us. It's forthcoming.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any comment from the public on this piece of the issue, number 5?
Seems.
There being none, I'll bring it back to the commission. Is there any comments from the commissioners? Is there a motion on this item?
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion that we postpone application P04-3B until such time as we have a plat to look at.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item carries. Other matters?
In terms of other matters, we will meet on December the 4th, and at that meeting, there will be a public hearing continued on the 14 school sites considered for public use zoning. We also have an application for review of a final development plan for a USD 305 alternative school as basically phase 2 of their Hageman Operations Center out there. It would be located north of the maintenance facility that's currently under construction near the corner of Hageman and Cloud. And so you'll have the continued public hearing on remapping or mapping of the public use educational facilities district, and then a companion separate item that deals with the Hageman Operations Center.
I have one comment, if I may.
Yes.
I think it's been a while since we've talked about entryways to the city, and that's kind of been one of my passions since I've been on this, and I may retire of old age before we get it done, I don't know. But the point is, I have seen some talk and some pictures about signs. Now, while I'm supportive of attractive signs, that's never been my concept of development of entryways, is just to put a nice sign there and call it improvement. My concept of development of entryways, such as 9th and I-70, Ohio and I-70, Crawford and 135, is well-lighted, attractive, well-maintained, mowed, landscaping, and developmental possibilities. That's my idea of entryways, and we haven't had that discussion again for a while, so I just didn't want to lose sight of that, or at least not make my feelings known about my interests in that.
The focus has been primarily on the entryway signs and features as a starting point. You made some recommendations in that regard of the particular design that you were favorable towards, as did the Community Art and Design Committee. That was presented to the City Commission in a study session form. I think they were favorable towards making that part of the capital improvement program and phasing that in, and prioritizing the entryways. Starting with that point, they also expressed interest in having a prototype for signs out along I-70, or the the interstate entry. So was their primary focus, and there's going to be some additional concept work done with that.
But maybe I wasn't, I want to be sure I'm clear. I'm not against signs, understand that. But I don't see that as the entire vision of an entryway, and I hope it's not lost. I hope the need for enhancing our entryways is not lost in the fact that we're going to put a sign up and call it quits. And let me give you an example. When you get off I-70 at Hayes, they've done some pretty nice development at I-70 and Hayes. And I don't know what their sign looks like. In fact, I can't even remember if they have a sign. But I can sure see all the businesses that have developed out there and the enhanced look of that area over the past 8 or 9 years. That's my vision of entryways, and I just wanted to be sure and share that.
Right, and what you have on West Crawford and on North 9th is a lot of floodway area where you're not going to get new business development, so the focus would have to be on the medians and the edges of roadways and things of enhancements there.
And maybe a levee or two to take care of some of that problem. Might not be a bad idea.
Yeah, and I can report back to you only about the entryway signs, because that's where the focus has been.
Well, Dean, you and I had talked one time about having a joint meeting with the city commission in form of a study session so that we can kind of see where both sides stand. I am totally in favor of Mr. Kennedy's ideas and have been since the very beginning. I think we need real gateways in this city to get people into the heart and see what Salina is all about. But the way it looks right now, I'm afraid we can't do that. But I think that we as a commission probably need to have some kind of an idea of where the city commission stands on some of these avenues, and conversely, they need to know where we stand on some of this stuff and how important it is to us. So, again, I'd still push for a joint meeting where we could all air our feelings.
Okay. And said they have had a study session where they reviewed your recommendations about entry signs and priorities of gateways, and that's been reported to them.
But again, my hope would be that we could face-to-face talk about these things with them in a joint meeting.
Okay, well, we will pass that along.
Thanks.
Thank you. And my recollection of what I heard reported about their meeting was that they took an outside-in approach to that. They were looking more at the interchanges farther out. And
the concept work had been at what we were calling entryways, is where you announce that you've arrived into the city at 9th Street at Crawford and those, and they wanted to move out to the outward areas and look at that as well.
Okay. Thank you. I was remiss to not introduce our new commission member, Wally Story, and welcome him. So now you're out there, but we're glad you're with us. Thank you. We're adjourned.
Okay, it's only 5:20. Excuse me.